Alright. Hey everybody, Midnight Amsel here. And welcome to a remaster of my previous two videos on how to mod in Motorsport Manager. Uh I'm just redoing these to just provide better info and also just to kind of make everything a bit more clean and clear. So, with that aside, let's get into it, shall we? So, what do you need to be able to mod Motorsport Manager, and what's the easiest way to do it? Well, there are two methods that you can do. One is the method that I'll be showing you, and the other is a method that you can do if you want to put the time into it. So, the method that I won't be covering today is this method here with this guy that you can see here on my screen. The guide to use the guide that involves using the Unity asset bundle extractor, which you can find here. I will put links. I will put a link to the guide here, to the guide on the description of the video, so that way you can find it. But that is not important right now because we are not doing that method. So you don't need to worry about this. But I am making you aware of this guide just in case you choose to go with this method. But anyways, the method we are going to be going with is the method that I've used to make my own mod, the Manufacturer's Cut mod, which is a mod that has taken over a year of, which has taken a year of. It's actually been out for over a year, but I have just been doing some tweaks here and there, just trying to make everything as best as it can be for it. But anyways, let's get into what you're going to need first. So what you're going to need first is right over here, the database, the Motorsport Manager Database editor. This thing is very good. This thing is very good. It is very simple and it does exactly what you need to be doing. It does exactly what you need. So, you can full screening this and trying to remove some of the stupid ads that are in the way. Thanks, Ray's department. But anyways, this database editor is actually really good. It can be very useful for helping you out with your modding journey. So I recommend getting this. You'll need an account to download this database editor. But once you get it, you should absolutely use it. So starting things off, I'm gonna show you starting things off. Here I already have the database editor. So once click this up. So once you get the file, you need to extract it obviously out of the package it's in, so you can actually use it. There will be three things: application, a folder named names and countries, and one called files. The application is simple enough. It'll open up this application right here for the database editor. We'll get back to that in just a second, but just to clarify something. So names and countries, what this does, this will just show you a list of all the valid countries in the game that you can use. Whether you want a team to be based in like Afghanistan or something, or have a driver based from Zimbabwe. You can do any of these countries that are on this list are valid countries you can select for your driver, a team, or whatever. Just keep that in mind. The other thing, and the names thing is simple enough. It just shows all the valid names that are available in the game database by default. However, you can put in your own different names if you so choose to. But anyways, here's the main thing to note, and this is key to the method that I do. This folder called files. It will show in this little folder. It has a bunch of text document files. Each one of these files is related to a database that the game uses to check things, and each one is important in their own different way. So going through them, and so we're gonna quickly go over them rapid fire, and then I'm gonna go over the ones that are either easy to change or ones that I would recommend fiddling with to get the game to make your own mod that to your own specifications for what you want. So, going through these in rapid fire order. Assistance. Going to this one. Going to this. Actually, I can just pull it up here at assistance. As you can see here, it shows this will be for the assistance for every single team that is in the game. Every single team that is in the game once you launch it, with 62 or 63 being the final one. And this will include all the open wheel teams, which goes from 2 to 30 to 31. 2 to 31 are all the open wheel teams. So keep that in mind. If you're wondering why it starts at 2, that is because all the files are based on spreadsheet form, and row 1 is for first name. It's for all the info that you see at the top of this little spreadsheet here. So keep that in mind. Team 2 is Steinemann by default. Team 2 is Steinemann by default, and Team 31 Team 31 will be the final team, which is Archer. I believe Archer BRM by default. Anyways, that aside, the assistance is easy enough. You can just change the name of the assistants and the name of the assistants, their date of birth, what they look like, and so on and so forth. So there you go. Buildings. Buildings relates to the buildings in your HQ and what they do. This I personally wouldn't recommend messing with because I haven't messed with it before, and I wouldn't try doing that. Although if you want to try messing with stuff, the main thing I can recommend doing is tweaking either the upgrade cost, the upgrade time, and the upkeep cost. So those are the things I can recommend to you. Nope, misclicked. Anyway, chairman again, same thing. Chairman is similar to assistants. You can change the name. You could change the name, gender, which team they're on, and nationality, and so on and so forth of each chairman, of every available chairman that is in the game by default. And that's all you need to know about that. You don't need to change it, but if you want to make a more realistic mod, then you should change those. Championships. This is something that we'll get into later, but just quickly going over it now. You can change what the name of the championship is when it's mentioned in a news article. You can change whether you can allow promotions or not for each series. Championship order, the acronym of it, and the locations where they go, locations for the locations they go to, the tracks, the rules that are restricted, and so on and so forth. So there you go. That is the main. So there you go. Again, I will go over this in slightly more detail later, but the point is, championship will affects the things regarding each championship series and what each one will have. Chassis. Chassis will be related to each team and the default chassis they have when you start the game. So depending on in this instance, again, Steinemann is 2. Steinemann will have a 0 because it picks engine supplier 0, which I believe is the Steinemann engine. And you can also see battery supplier, material supplier, fuel supplier, brake supplier. Those stats for chassis are related to the parts suppliers the parts suppliers trait, so that is something to keep in mind. So if you're going to mess with the chassis, you also need to mess with you also need to check the parts suppliers for reference. Climate that is related to weather. I wouldn't mess with that. Otherwise, you could really cause some problems. So I wouldn't personally recommend that. Default parts is a really good one that you can. Default parts is something that's really fun, and you can get kind of creative with it. Default parts the default parts for each team for each team and car for each car of each team when you start a career mode. So you can see the top speed. So you can see the TS or top speed, which would be the engines for each of the open wheel teams, and you can see what their base performance will be, their base reliability, what condition, how much their condition, and how much improvement they can have when you first jump into the game. So that is just something that you can mess with to have interesting starts to your career mode. Driver stat progression. I wouldn't really. This is something again that I haven't messed with. You can if you know these just influence how much a driver can grow from different things during a race weekend. Again, I don't mess with that, so I don't touch it. So I recommend don't touch it unless you know what you're doing. Drivers. This is something again we'll get into in more detail, but you can see again you can change name, gender, what team that each driver is on, their status in the team, their nationality, date of birth, which traits they have, which is related to the personality traits spreadsheet. So keep that in mind. If you want to change personality traits of a driver, you need go to personality traits here because some of them are pretty cool, but you need to make sure they don't conflict with each other. You can also see their weight. You can also see weight, which is in the other system that for non-US people. So keep that in mind. Same thing applies to temperature, by the way. Temperature will be in Celsius rather than Fahrenheit. So keep that in mind. You can also see wages, their contract. See wages, contracts, any bonuses they would get, and the main thing, their stat. The main things, their stats. So you can see what their stats will be when you first load into the game, and they're labeled right for you, so it's easy to see. And you can also check and see right about here the amount of potential they have, which the potential will be in terms of whole points. So say like a driver can grow. So say like a driver, there's 180 points. There's 180 points that a driver can possibly have across the 9 stats. So 9 times 20. So 180. So keep that in mind. If you tweak with a driver's stats, the number cannot be higher than 180. Otherwise the game will crash. So make sure you check your math on that. If you say you want to have a driver that's 5-star potential, maybe not go full 5-star like all 20s. Maybe make it so that way they have like 2 less points than like 178 potential points and for a driver to have. So that way you have a margin of error. You can also see like hair color, body. You can also change their appearance and what they would look like if you pay attention. Their helmet colors, the marketability, their marketability. You can change that stat too. You can also see their improvement rate. The higher the number for improvement rate, the better the driver will improve naturally. The lower the rate, the lower they improve naturally without the effect of buildings. Peak age is when a driver will hit their peak and they will not gain any more and they will not improve anymore as a driver no matter what you do. Star rating is not important. You can leave that alone and you don't need to tweak it when tweaking a driver's stats. So don't worry. Anyways, next up, well, there's engineer stat progression. You know what that is. Engineers, same thing. Engineers has the same thing as assistants and chairman. You can change name, nationality, gender, things like that. So don't worry. HQ it will affect what buildings are available for what buildings each team will have at the beginning of the game. So design center is 4, factory is 3 for Steinemann. That means we will have a max level design center of level 4 and a level 3 factory when you start the game as Steinemann. You can change these and tweak these to your liking. Just make sure you know how many levels you can have for each building. you cannot have a level 5 factory. That does not exist in the game's code, and the game will probably crash if you do that. So don't do that. But yeah, you can tweak anything you want. You can tweak anything you want. So you can tweak anything you want as long as that level of that building exists. For buildings that only have one upgrade, you would only put a 1. And if the spot is left blank, that means that team will not have that building in their HQ. Journalist is pointless. You don't really need to change that unless you're going for full realism. So don't worry about that. Mechanics stat progression, don't need to go over that. Mechanics, again, same thing as engineers, assistants, and chairman. You know what to do with that. It's the same thing. Media outlets, don't really need to worry about that, but that's what they look like in case you were curious. Part components. This is something that's very interesting. If you're really smart, or if you have a lot of time, you can really get creative with this and make the part components a hell of a lot different. So you could have like ridiculous part components that are only unlocked in legendary, or just make some of the earlier part components you get like for the average or good ranks a lot better. You can get really creative with it if you know what you're doing. But again, be careful. When tweaking things. I would recommend saving early, saving often, and having backup copies. And having a lot of backup copies. I will get into that a little bit later. Anyway, parts is related to the car. It's related to the car parts, which is actually pretty interesting. So you can see what's available. Anyway, so say like you want to. So you can see here the base. You can see the base performance for the stat of each kind of each car. So say for instance in the World Motorsport Championship, you want to make the base stat of the engine slightly higher. You can do that. And you can also see the base max stat and things like that. You can also see the championship max right here. So say for instance you want the absolute max performance of the engines to be slightly higher. So say you want the absolute max the engine can be without triggering a reset to be 4,000. You can do that. However, that means that part can be developed a lot longer than all the other parts. Same thing applies to all the other ones. So, in this case, for the World Motorsport Championship, if a part reaches performance level of 2,850 or higher, that means that part could trigger a potential part reset for the part performance, and it'll get nerfed back to a lower performance. Once you trigger a reset. Personality traits, I already went over that. Personality traits only relates to drivers and nothing else, so keep that in mind. Each personality trait has a number. And some have a requirement for certain drivers. However, you technically can bypass those requirements for certain drivers. If you so choose to. Although again, don't mess with things too much. Don't mess with things that don't need to be messed with. Otherwise, it could cause issues. But you can see everything that each trait could affect right along the spreadsheet. So there you go. It's politicians. You don't need to worry about politicians. Don't worry about that. That's not important. Scouts, that only affects the scout that talks to you about the drivers you scout, so don't need to worry about that. Simulation settings, as far as I'm aware, this text file does not do anything. Making changes to this does not affect anything in game, so don't touch that. Sponsors is related to all the sponsors. You can change what their name is and things like that. Also, actually, I should have mentioned this earlier. This is related to media outlets and part components, part suppliers, and championships. Changing the names of the of some of the things they just listed will not change what their logo looks like. Changing their logo is related to is related to a different file, so keep that in mind. I will link a guide for you so that way you can try and change logos on your own. I personally have never done that, I can't really help with that one, unfortunately. But anyway, sponsors, you can change what their name are, what nationality they're from, their logo index, things like that, or things like that. Prestige is related to how many stars you need to be able to potentially get that sponsor signed to your team. So if it's five, you need to have five. Your team needs to have 5 stars marketability, so that way you can sign that sponsor, and the slot is related to which slot you can potentially sign that sponsor to. Uh, you can see the upfront value that its sponsor will give, the home bonus it will give if it's a target sponsor, the bonus difficulty, the bonus target, the amount that you get for target sponsors, and the per race amount for sponsors that pay you per race, and so on and so forth, as you can see here. However, I would only change what is necessary. Again, only change what is necessary. Don't change things that don't need to be changed. Team colors is all team colors that is related to each team. So keep that in mind. Although you may see although again you don't need to change everything on the team color to get things to work. The main things to change for team color is the color of the staff's clothes, so that way they match the color of the car. The color of the UI color. The UI color should be changed. And for the car, the primary, secondary, tertiary, and trim colors should be changed. The extra livery colors do not need to be changed whatsoever. Although the other things you could change is the sponsor colors if you so choose to, but you do not need to do this. And the last thing to mention, team principals. This is related to what your team principal will have for a name, and for a name when they are in the game and you do not control them. So keep that in mind. And teams, as you can see, is related to the teams, so you can see what they have. Also, one thing to mention: the team Well, I mentioned before that the parts for each team that the teams go that in the that over here in default parts teams the team ID the team is goes 2 3 starts at 2 and then goes 3 4 5 so on and so on. There is no number 1. However, there is one thing that bypasses that rule. That is team colors. Team colors starts at color ID 1 and then goes 2 3 4 5 6 so on and so on. So keep that in mind. The color ID of 1 is for Steinemann. However, Steinemann's default part ID is 2. Just make sure you pay attention to that. And line them up correctly. Anyways, you can see the team name. You can change team name. Their short name. The short name they'll be called while in game by a driver or whatever. Their location, which will be their location ID, which if you change the country that the team is located in, you also need to change the location ID. So keep that in mind. Other things to mention: political attributes is related to voting. Team bio changing the team bio here does not do anything, so don't change that. You can see the rivals that each team has, how much pressure they'll place on you, their default starting budget, their default starting budget, their marketability, you can also see their opinion of the manager, which would be either you or the default one, and also the team. You can also give them a custom start description if you so choose to. But that aside, that is everything here. But now you might be wondering, well, that's all good and all, but what do I do with this? This could look slightly confusing. Well, if you either want to make this easier on yourself, or if you want to make this easier on yourself, or if you don't like the way the database editor looks itself, then we go back to the files folder here. So the way I do files, the way I do my modding is rather than just using the database editor alone, I use a spreadsheet, and I will pull up the spreadsheet that I use for the manufacturer cup right here. As you can see, this is the spreadsheet that I have. This is a spreadsheet that I personally have, and what I use to change anything I need to change for modding purposes. You can see every single file that I use here. In your case, what you would need to do, go to Google Spreadsheets, go to imports, go to the folder that I just showed that's in the database editor, and then import that file onto a sheet. As you can see, you can have multiple sheets per one specific file, so that way you can keep everything on the same thing, and you don't have to switch between different tabs on your browser to check everything. You can just flip through them like this and reorganize them so ones that fit together are in the same place. You can also leave yourself comments and things like that in the Google spreadsheets, so that way you can leave yourself reminders or things like that if you so choose to. However, using Google Sheets, to get stuff from Google Sheets back into Motorsport Manager is a little bit interesting. So let's do that. Say for instance I wanted to take my file for the teams, this custom file here, and I want to bring it back into the game. Well, here's what you would need to do. You would need to do the following. First, you need to go to on Google Sheets, go to where it says download, and then download a comma separated values sheet. It'll download the current sheet that you are on. So in my case, the teams one. So if I do that and I download it, as you can see right there it is. So I do that, and now I go to my downloads, and you go to downloads and go to pick up the folder, to pick up the file. So now you can see the file here. Now what I would recommend doing is making sure if you're doing modding stuff like this, have a folder for your modding stuff, and try and keep things organized so that way stuff that is modded is separate from stuff that isn't modded, and stuff like that. Also another thing, make sure you have backups of files that are saved. So say for instance you're modding. So I guess just to quickly clarify that, say for instance you have a file that works in Motorsport Manager. Like you already tested a file for the teams to have different names and stuff like that, and it works just fine. Good for you. You did it. Good for you. You did it. Congratulations. Now, what I would do is take that file that you know works and put it in a folder labeled backups, like what I have done here, so that way you have a backup of a file that already works. So if for some reason you mess up on Google Sheets, and that file that you brought from Google Sheets to the game does not work, you have a working backup of that file on hand, so you can just re-import it into Google Sheets, and you can just go back and try again with whatever tweaks you were trying to make. But anyways, but anyways, let, but anyways, let's but anyways back to getting your file from Google Sheets to the game. I have the file here. I have the file here. I have the file here. I'm gonna move it to my Motorsport Manager folder, and from here, what you need to do, because it's a CV, because you need a text file to make this work for the game. What you need to do now? Go to Notepad++. Alternatively, you could do Notepad, but Notepad++ is better. I feel is better for this. Go to Notepad++ and open up the file. You don't need to change anything else. You don't need to change anything else on the actual sheet. As long as you've made all the changes you want on Google Sheets, or in the database editor, you are fine. Once you have done that, go to file and save the folder and go to save as, and then you can save the file as a text file. That way it'll actually work. So I will put the file in back in my folder. Now, I should mention this now. When you're converting your file from your Google Sheets file from a CVT to a text file, make sure of one very specific thing: the name of the file. This is very important. So let me quickly go back to the database editor. Do you see the way these files are? If you notice the way these files are labeled, make sure that the file that your modded text file is named exactly like the way these files are. So in my case, the file for the teams needs to be labeled like this. This is important. If it's not labeled correct, if it's not named correctly, the game will not recognize it. Well, the game will not recognize that file, and it will not work. Even if everything else in the file is perfectly fine, if it's not named correctly, the game will not recognize it, and it will not work. So keep that in mind. Anyway, I'm gonna name my file teams. Now we have that. Now we have our text file. Great. Now, how do you get it into the game so that way you can try modding with? So you can try test your modded database file. Well, here's what you need to do next. Go to Steam. You need to go to Steam. What you need to do now, go to Steam and go to Motorsport Manager. You need to go to Steam if it'll load for me, of course. Okay, there we go. Go to Steam, go to Motorsport Manager on Steam. On your little Steam thing, go to where it is, and what you need to do now, you can right click here, right click on the game on Motorsport Manager and go to Properties. So go to Properties. If you don't know where it is, go to Properties, and then what will happen next? This will pop up. If it'll actually load, of course. If it'll actually load, of course. Well, there it goes. So you can now see this. You should be able to see this now. What you need to do now: go to local files. And then you would need to click Browse. It'll show you exactly where the file, where your files for Motorsport Manager is. So that way you can get to it a lot easier. Now then, to get this file in the game so that way it works, what you need to do now is that you need to go to so I'm on Motorsport Manager. I'm on the folder that the game is on. Go to MM Data folder. Then go to modding, And since we are using the database editor and we're using database text files here, go to databases. And then you just drag and drop your file into this database folder. Once you do that and that file is in there and you've done everything correctly up to this point, once you launch the game, you can go to the workshop section of the main menu. You can go to the workshop section of the game in the main hub. Go to the Steam Workshop, and then you can select the My Mods section. Once you do that, you should be able to see any database file that is in this folder in the game. If it doesn't show up, that means you labeled it incorrectly, or it is not a text file. So keep that in mind. If the file shows up, that means the game recognizes it, and then you can go to the main menu. You can go to the main menu. You can go back to the main menu, and then you can go start a new career, and then select the slider to test your mods If the game crashes, then that means something in the text file is incorrect, and you might need to fix something there. If the game loads up, then congratulations, you have successfully modded a file in a video game, and now you know the basics of how to mod Motorsport Manager. Then you can once you know that your file worked, once you've done all the testing you need for your file, or once you've started up a career mode when you're testing your mods, you can do one of two things: play the game and check things over until you know your modded text file is done, or if you need to save and quit and then go make more changes, go save and quit. You can save your game or just straight up quit out if you so choose to. However, one thing to mention: when you're testing your mods in Motorsport Manager, then if you modify, say, like, for instance, I go into Steam to test all these files, and then for some reason I don't like the default parts file, and then I go back to Google Sheets. I make a couple changes to that file. I do the process to convert the Google Sheets, this file on Google Sheets, into a text file, and then into here, and then I place it in, replacing the old one. Once you do that, the file that you were using to test the old version of one of your text files is invalid. Those changes, to my knowledge, will not carry over. So then you would need to start a new career mode to continue testing. So keep that in mind. Again, if the game crashes, there is something wrong, and there is something wrong with that file, and you might need to make changes. Personally, here's what I would do. When you're making changes, I would only go one series at a time. So for most of you, I would assume you want to make changes in the open wheel with the open wheel cars. So for instance, in this case, say you want to change the names of the teams. What I recommend doing, start with the World Motorsport Championship, and then only do the teams in the World Motorsport Championship. So teams 2 to 11 here. So 2 to 11, change those, change everything you need to in this column up here, above this line. Everything above this line, go ahead, change it to whatever you want to do, and then port that file over to your to this folder here. Make sure then once you know all your changes work, save that file in your backups folder, and then carry on and do the Asia Pacific Cup teams. Then do the same process, make sure everything works. Once you know everything works, Move on to the third tier. Move on to the European Racing Series. Do all the changes you need to do, and then boom, put everything in the folder. Make sure everything works, and then bam, you're done. You've done it. This way with this process, that way you don't need to change everything if you make a mistake. If you make a mistake, you can just go back to say like you get the all the WMC teams changed to be similar to what mine are. They're they're different the teams are related to realistic teams and whatnot, and so on and so forth. Say you've done that and everything works just fine. Good job, you've done it. Now what you need, and then you go onto the Asia Pacific Cup and you make a mistake, and say you make a mistake somewhere. Say you make a mistake somewhere. Say like for some reason you forgot to give the team a budget or something, and the game crashes when you try to load them up. Try to load the new file with your changes to the Asia Pacific Cup. Instead of panicking, freaking out, thinking, "Oh no, everything! Oh no, what have I done?" You can just simply go back to your backup folder, import it back into Google Sheets, and then you're all set and ready. You're all set, and you can carry on making changes like nothing happened, and then maybe trial and error and figure out where you made a mistake if you made a mistake. So there you go. That is a simple, more abridged version of those two parts that I made a while ago and brought to Reddit on how to mod Motorsport Manager with the database editor method. Again, also when again you can choose to do it with you can choose to just use the database editor if you so choose to. In the case of the database editor, choose to save the file where you can manually choose to save the file wherever you want, and it'll already be labeled correctly. Although I would personally not recommend saving the file directly to the modding folder. Save it to wherever you actually want the file to go, so that to wherever you want the file to actually go. So in my case, it would be in my folder where I store all my mods for whatever I want to do. I would save it in here so that way I can actually get access to it a lot easier, and then bring it over to them. Then bring your file over to the game files. It's a much simpler way of doing it. This way technically is easier, but I personally like using Google Sheets, so that way it's a lot easier to keep track of changes I've made, and just to kind of make things easier on myself. But again, you can just use the database editor just fine and not need to use Google Sheets whatsoever. You can go with my method, or you can go with just the database method. Also, when you save a file with the database editor, do not do this. Do not hit yes on this option, because once your file is saved, this will pop up. Do you want to override the base database file? Say you need to click no, because if you click yes and you made a mistake somewhere, actually even if you click yes, once you click yes, you'll need to verify your game files to bring the game back to its default state, because now the default file for your teams or sponsors or whatever you were changing with the database editor is now the technical correct file that is going to be in the game. You will need to verify your game files with Steam by going to here, by going back into properties, going to local files, and verifying the integrity of the game files, and to make sure that everything is correct. So just keep that in mind. Keep that in mind when you're changing things. But with that aside, that is everything regarding the database editor. And that's regarding everything regarding the database editor. So I hope this was a bit of a cleaner version of what methods are available for changing the basic databases of Motorsport Manager. with that aside, I'll briefly go over the files that I would recommend changing if you want to have a different experience when playing Motorsport Manager. Personally, the files I would recommend changing are the following. I would I would rec- I would recommend if you I would recommend changing the following. HQ for HQ, so that way teams can better build and develop parts at a faster rate from the get go. If you want to have a slightly harder challenge, aside from just tweaking the difficulty in game with the in game settings. Teams, if you want to have teams, while changing the logos of the teams is not the easiest thing in the world to do. Changing the team names is easy, and you can do that. And you can do that and it's very very easy to do, as I've already said. You can change their team names, so you could say you want to have like the teams from the real life Formula One teams instead of what I have. You can go ahead and do that very easily, and just you can go ahead and do that very easily, and just change all the stuff that you want to change here. However, you can also by extension with changing team names, I would also recommend changing the team. I also recommend you change the team colors, so that which will be in HTML color codes here. So keep that in mind. If you want to change the team's color, say you want to change the team's color to be all black or something, or use an HTML color code or something. You can either Google a specific color you want the car to look like, or you can just use this little color code thing that you can find here, or just Google any color code thing whatsoever. So that way you can change stuff, and you can change the car colors to be whatever you want. Drivers. Drivers is actually very easy. Drivers is actually a fairly easy to file to change if you so choose to. The the main things I would the main pitfalls to avoid with changing the drivers though is pay attention to their date of birth. Make sure their date of birth is correct. Make sure their date of birth is okay. The drivers can't be too young or too old, obviously. If they're too young, the game will crash. If they're too old, they'll be past their peak age and they won't improve whatsoever. That is one thing to watch out for. Pay attention to their traits and pay attention to their personality traits and make sure that they are valid. Pay attention. Another thing to pay attention to is their stats. Their stats cannot go over driver stats cannot go over 20, so keep them. Driver stats cannot go over 20, so watch out for that. And their potential combined with their stats cannot exceed the number of 180. Otherwise, again, the game can potentially crash. So watch out for that. And the final two things to mention with the final two major things to mention with drivers, peak age is something that I would absolutely recommend changing. If you want drivers to last longer in game, you can change their peak ages. You just need to remember that their date of birth will affect that. If the game will always start on the default of the year 2016. So their date of birth. So in this case, Lewis Hamilton's birthday. While not his actual real, not related to the actual real Lewis's birthday. Lewis Hamilton in game for me will be 30 years old. So keep that in mind. Personality traits, I would recommend holding on to this file. If you're changing drivers, you need to have personality traits so that way you can make the drivers different. Default parts is another file I would recommend changing just so that way. So if you want to say for instance you want to have you want to have Predator Racing not be so terrible. Well, that's actually very simple. All you would need to do go to slot 29 because slot 29 is normally Predator Racing. In my case, it's Minority, but you get the point. Predator is normally slot 29, so all you would need to do go down to go to slot 29 for go to slot 29 for like the engines for the engine or for the engine, the gearbox or whatever parts you want to tweak, and then go ahead and tweak them so that way you can make that team better. And it's also kind of fun because that way you can, by tweaking the parts, you can tweak the pecking order at the start of the game, so you might get different results. To normal. Uh, part Part suppliers, while fun, don't mess. Part suppliers, while interesting at first, it can get very confusing very quickly. So I wouldn't mess with that. And the only other thing I could potentially recommend messing with is the other two things I can recommend changing. The sponsors, because the sponsors say you think teams aren't getting paid enough from the sponsors. You can go ahead and tweak those. You can go and tweak the per race payment sponsors and tweak their payments so that way they pay more. Or you can tweak it so certain sponsors are accessible with less star ratings. You can choose to go with whatever you want. And as for championships is the final file I would recommend tweaking. You can tweak the locations. You can tweak the locations, as you can see here from someone else who helped me with this file. If you tweak the file, if you tweak the locations, tweaking the location numbers can tweak the order of the champion, tweak the order of each team goes, where each series goes, and you can also, and as for rules will apply to this file here, rule changes. So if you want to change the rules of a championship, you need to have this rule change file here, so that way you can see the order. That way you can see which rules are which, or related to which number, and things like that. If you want to, and if you want to change the order of tracks that each series goes to, the max as you saw from that comment is 20. But anyway, you can see the circuit ID here. You can see the circuit ID here, which track layout it is, and so on. So you can keep track of that. You can quite literally keep track of which track you want each series to go to. And there you go. A much better conclusive guide to Motorsport Manager with the database editor, so that way you can try and have a more interesting experience for yourself. Once you've made all the tweaks and changes you've made, and you know all your files work, you can either publish your own personal mod to the Steam Workshop if you so choose to, or you can continue to run your changes in private. Or you can continue to run your changes in private by just continuing to use the test my mods method, and just loading the save file that has your own custom mods available. The choice is up to you. But anyways, like I said, that is everything I wanted to cover here. With that, after talking for almost an hour, we're all set and done here. So with that, I have been Midnight Absol, and I will see you guys later. And now I am going to go play some more Motorsport Manager myself with my own mod. Time to go have some fun. Time to go have some fun myself. But anyways, happy holidays. Happy holidays from wherever you're watching this in the world, and just make sure and take your time when modding. You don't need it. Rushing things does not solve anything. Just take your time, be calm, be relaxed, and you will get to your goal in the end. Have fun, boys and girls. Bye.